I'd like to welcome our moderator, Pia Infante. She's the trustee and co-executive director of the Whitman Institute. She's a recognized thought leader in the field of trust-based philanthropy and value-based leadership. She's led discussions at such forums as the Harvard Kennedy School, the Ashoka Forum, at Fast Forward, Net Impact, Opportunity, Collaboration, and many, many, many others. So without further ado, Pia.
Hi. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to see you. I would like to humbly say on behalf of all of us that you have made a very good choice this afternoon. And as you read about and can see, we have just an incredible group of folks assembled. Parminder has noted that she's the only one who does not live in the United States, and has accused us of being under 21, which we are not, the rest of us. So just briefly, this is Vu Le, nonprofit AF you may know of, and Parminder Veer, who is the CEO of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and Jessamyn Shams-Lau, who is the executive director of the Peery Foundation. I know, all fantastic people. So I'm just going to say a few of our intentions for the hour and 15 minutes we have with you. One is we want to give some shape to the definition of what is proximate philanthropy in our understanding, and maybe some examples of fantastic failure, and some creative examples. And we hope that you walk away inspired to bold, inconvenient, and uncomfortable action, and that we have a lively dialogue together. So I don't know about you, but I was very, very moved by Brian Stevenson in the opening plenary. And I was moved by the notion of, and I had this question in my mind. He said something like, it is a time for us to really commit to uncomfortable and inconvenient acts. It's just that time. And so what I thought about when I thought about this panel is, I hope it's the funders and investors that are imagining that we are the ones that need to be inconvenienced. Because so many of our beneficiaries and our partners in the nonprofit sector are already deeply uncomfortable and inconvenienced by this time in history, deep inequality, the things we've been talking about so much at this event. So I'm actually going to start us off not with best practices, which is a phrase I'm slightly allergic to, but with the notion of spectacular failures of philanthropy. And I think that even the notion of proximate philanthropy has baked within it both a lot of potential, but also a lot of potential for harm. Because if we are not cognizant of our power, our privilege, our just sort of the intrinsic systemic imbalances that we are dealing with in many of our societies, the idea of becoming more proximate to those who are experiencing the problem, if we don't approach that with compassion, listening, thoughtfulness, respect, asking for permission, we could actually be treading, exploiting, appropriating, right? And these are not, unfortunately, things that are unfamiliar in the sector of philanthropy. So while we're not going to spend all of our time in where philanthropy has failed, because we want to leave you with the bulk of our time in terms of creativity and inspiration and catalytic action, I am going to start us off with, folks, talk to us, give us each one example of spectacular failure in philanthropy, and it could be something you were directly involved in or something you witnessed being in this field. I actually want to start with Vu, because you're the only one. I know. Did you just shake your head at me? He has a very sarcastic face. I won't take it personally. Because you're the only one of us that's actually not in a funder role on this panel, so I thought I would prioritize your voice.
Thank you, Pia. I want to start by saying that I got 1.5 hours of sleep last night because of jet lag. It was great. I got to FaceTime my family at 4 a.m., which is good. So I'm not entirely lucid right now, and I'm hallucinating this whole conversation. So, yeah. Spectacular failure. I'm really glad that we're talking about this, and I think we're not talking about the physical proximity of foundations to nonprofits, even though I think that actually might be a good topic too. Like, can you just move your offices down to the ground? Why are you always downtown? A lot of people just can't find parking downtown. And a lot of communities of color are not going to go downtown because we don't want to deal with the one-way streets in Seattle. So yes, we should talk about physical proximity, but we're talking about like foundations trying to be listening. There's like this whole thing about listening. We got to listen to our grantees. We got to listen to our communities, right? And I think a spectacular failure is when philanthropists, foundations try to listen to people, and what they're actually just doing is they're being assholes. They ask people to give input that doesn't actually do anything. You're an asshole if you do that, okay? And I've been seeing this repeatedly. So a recent failure is a bunch of foundations in Seattle got together over the past 5 years and said, and their whole, they're trying to do capacity building for organizations, and especially organizations led by communities of color. So for 5 years, they're like, how do we build capacity of organizations led by communities of color? How do we bring more leaders of color into the sector? Which is what my organization, Rainier Valley Corps, does. So then, like every year, they put on a summit where they go to the community and say, how do we bring more leaders of color into? And this is what my organization is doing. So I said, this is what you need to do. Okay, it's not miraculous. It's not like some amazing thing that my organization discovered to bring more leaders of color into the sector and to build an infrastructure of organizations led by communities of color. You provide them with multi-year unrestricted funding to organizations led by communities of color. Right. Yet again, when I told them this, I was like, why are you doing this? Why would you ask communities again to do this? And they were like, well, we listen to you, but we want to be sure that we listen to everyone else because we want to be on the ground with people and we want to engage with community. And this community engagement is a big thing in Seattle.
Listening tours.
Yeah, listening tours.
It's one of my favorites.
And yes, one of my jokes that I give is, in Seattle, if you're walking down a dark alley at night and you feel like someone is like following you, it's probably someone trying to do some community engagement. Okay? This is. And yeah, and we're sick of it. We're sick of it. And so just a couple of weeks ago, I was asked yet again, boo, we have this summit. We want to bring all the leaders of color to this summit for 3 hours so we can talk about how to bring more leaders of color into the sector and support organizations led by communities of color. I was like, just give us money. Give money to organizations and leaders of color. The end. Just stop wasting everyone's time. But no, they had hundreds of people going to this summit, wasting 3 hours of their time that it could be, and they're going to give the same answer, and then they're going to be neglected and ignored again.
That sounds like a spectacular failure. Shall we move down the line here? Parminder?
Okay. I'm going to bring, for the last 4 years, I've been living and working in Lagos, Nigeria. This is a bit she forgot to add. Parminder, we're from Lagos, Nigeria, running Africa's largest entrepreneurship program. So here are some examples of failure that I've observed from the West coming to save Africa. Development aid, billions of dollars have been poured into Africa, and yet the African continent remains still the poorest and the most underdeveloped. Not because of Africans, but because of the people who claim to want to save and support and help develop Africa. Consultants, there's a whole army of consultants that cream off the money, never mind the African leaders, etc., but consultants, Western consultants, who put themselves as the mediators in between, the people who really need the resources and the money and the skills, etc., and cream off huge chunks of money. Phenomenal fundamental failure. Talking shops, and in the last 4 years, I come from the world of filmmaking. I spent 30 years telling stories, making films across Africa, Asia, Latin America, working with local talents from those countries, yeah? I've never been to a talking shop, or as many talking shops as I've been to in the last 4 years, from Davos to Clinton Global Initiative to whatever, yes, you name it, summits, forums, conferences. And I start conversations with the multilateral donor agencies, foundations, et cetera, saying this is what we're doing in Africa. where is there a meeting ground? How can we collaborate? And I then spend about an hour listening to them telling me about their solutions for Africa. Never mind the fact that I've just told them this is a Made in Africa, by an African, for Africans foundation with a $100 million commitment. And then you talk, and then you follow up with an email saying this is what we spoke and this is what we agreed. And 12 months later, you might come back to the same forum because you have to go to these forums, right? And the conversation starts again. So talking shops, yeah, which is, and the other is the emergence of certainly vanity foundations across the emerging markets as well, yeah. I've made my money, let me set up a foundation, which is really, is going, which does unfocused foundations, yeah. That's why I think the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and the only reason I made the inconvenient, I took the inconvenient. I was happy living in London in a very comfortable home, about to retire at the age of 57. Now I'm 62. But I made that it was going to be very inconvenient for me to locate to Lagos to help operationalize this extraordinary man's vision, a private sector leader who wanted to commit $100 million of his own private wealth to empowering 10,000 African entrepreneurs across 54 African countries over the next 10 years. Notice it's not a one-off project. It wasn't a year-long project. It wasn't an initiative. It's actually saying Africa's solution is in the hands of African startups and African entrepreneurs. And none of the development agencies are willing to play at the bottom of the pyramid. 0 to 3-year-olds, business ideas. I have a business idea. It's a solution to a problem in my local community, and I need the training, I need the mentoring, I need the platform where I can, share and cross-fertilize my ideas, and I need a small amount of seed capital. The kind that family, fools, and friends give. Well, this is what the foundation is providing through the structured approach. So that's my, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give two very concrete, kind of practical examples of failure. One is one that we experienced a few years ago at the Peery Foundation. So the foundation that I work for, we're a small family foundation, and I feel very lucky that our board is very excited about the idea of listening to grantees, not listening to them too much though. Not for 3 hours, every week. We're not a talking shop, not a listening tour. But just building into our processes, grantee feedback and experience. And we really try and minimize the time that people spend on their applications and their reporting and such when interacting with the foundation. And so one of the things that we did at the beginning of the time that I was with the foundation, which is when it first professionalized, was we decided that we would minimize the time so much that all we needed for an application, instead of an application, was just to get a one-pager from an organization about their work. And a few months into this, we got feedback from an entrepreneur that said, do you know what? It actually takes me longer to produce a one-pager than it would to produce a 3 or a 5-pager, because I've already got one of those on hand. And we're like, okay, we didn't realize that because we hadn't completed our own process for ourselves. And so that was kind of a real, just a moment in time where we realized what we thought was being helpful was not necessarily being as helpful as we anticipated. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side of that, I also wanted to share a failure that happened for our team as well. So our team suffered and were put in probably more of an uncomfortable situation than was appropriate. So in pursuing this idea of grantee-centric philanthropy, which is our philosophy at the Peery Foundation, our grantee-facing staff were spending an enormous amount of time talking with, supporting with, being available to, being in the community with one of our portfolios of grantees on our doorstep in East Palo Alto. We're based in Palo Alto. And our portfolio director, who was leading that portfolio, became very good friends with a lot of those grantees, and they all had her phone number. She was involved and up to date on all the politics that were going on in the community, and had been a teacher in the community and an administrator in the community, so it was very embedded in the community. But it got to the point where she was so emotionally and mentally overwhelmed that she was on the edge of a breakdown, because she was taking phone calls from grantees through the night. They were calling her at 11 p.m. at midnight saying, "I've just finished work. There's a crisis with the superintendent. I don't know how to tackle this conversation. My staff is going through this crisis and we've had 3 people leave because of burnout." Or whatever it was, they would call her, and that was amazing that they had somebody to call. But we also realized that probably wasn't her job, and she probably wasn't the right person to do that job either. She's not a therapist, she's not trained in counseling, and really those were the conversations that they were coming to her with. And so again, realizing that we'd almost, like, I think we just misdiagnosed what grantee-centric philanthropy should be and what an appropriate way of employing that is for a foundation. And so, met with some of those grantees and said what would help. And we've started piloting a program now where we actually contract with a counseling service to provide mental, emotional support for their frontline workers and their leadership. So what was a crisis in the moment, and my colleague has kind of taken some time to readjust her workload and set the right boundaries and appropriate expectations. And now we're starting this work with the counseling service has now turned into something that we hope will work better. But again, who knows? It probably won't be the perfect solution, but it's a step forward because we've taken into consideration what we've heard from everybody involved.
Yeah. And thank you for that intimate, powerful, personal example in your institution. I don't think foundations are transparent enough about when we have spectacular failure. And I think that could lead to the next question, which it's sort of like right-sizing our understanding of what Proximate is. So one of the premises of this session is that there's this assumption that maybe if solutions are being thought about over here, maybe in an ivory tower or something, and it's meant to apply to a community over here, like in Africa, like you said, that translation can be not proximate, not useful, sometimes harmful. And then you've also described, and I think I also have in my mind the sense that a proximity that doesn't sort of respect the self-determination or the real needs of a community and has funders assuming roles that we should probably not try to assume is also what is the balance? I guess maybe I'd have the 3 of you speak to, if you were going to speak to a proximate philanthropy that is, nuanced and balanced and respectful of the self-determination of the communities we want to support, but also not that sense that we run into the middle of a forest and leave money on a tree stump, right? Because that's not quite right role either, right? Because if we did that, then how do we know that who is that money going to go to, right? Is that going to go to the current patriarch who isn't respectful of sort of gender issues in the community? So the question is, what is the balance that we would imagine would be a good balance and sort of a positive, productive one in terms of defining proximate philanthropy? I'd also be curious to hear what you all might have to say to this too. We're going to break to you in about 15 minutes. Does anyone want to take that?
Are you still Jen?
I'm good.
Okay. Obviously, for me, would I ever have thought about moving from film to foundation, which was, a Western-based foundation that was going to go out and save Africa? No. Fundamentally, no, absolutely not, yeah? The attraction of the Tony Elumelu Foundation was that it was on the ground. It was by an African for Africans. He is an African. He is a Nigerian who made his money in Nigeria. And in his life, while he is still alive, he's only 53, he wants to see the benefit of giving back, yeah? He understands Africa. He understands Nigeria. He understands the African continent, because also as a chairman of United Bank for Africa, a bank that he started, that he merged, he's a banker by background, which then could have remained in Nigeria, but then he went to 19 African countries. Remember Europe, not so much the US, We left 54 African countries behind, okay? After we finished colonizing it, after we finished pillaging it, raping it, extracting everything from it, yeah? We left countries like Uganda, which used to be the biggest cotton producer, importing secondhand clothes, yeah? A country like Uganda, which has 14 million cows, imports secondhand shoes, right? We left behind a continent of people unskilled, yeah? An entrepreneurial class which was decimated, yeah? Tony Elumelu is that private sector leader who sees that it is the private sector leaders in Africa that are going to lead to the economic and social transformation of that continent. I totally and utterly support that, yeah? He believes that, and for him, entrepreneurship is the way forward, and to institutionalize luck. He felt that as a 26-year-old setting out in his career as a banker, he got lucky. He wanted to institutionalize that. He also wants to democratize opportunity, yeah? And that, and certainly the entrepreneurship program is a way, was a way of doing that. My job was simply to go in there and help create a structure. I had two options. One was to parachute existing entrepreneurship programs. I've been a part of many, certainly in the UK, US, and Europe, as a filmmaker and as a mentor and etc. throughout my life. And I could have simply said, it's easy, Peery, you don't have to waste money bringing me in. We just import, we'll just parachute an American model or a European model. But I know that that's not how I made film, so there was no way I was going to take that approach. And neither did he. It was really important that this model emerged from the ground up. And there's no way that I certainly couldn't have done that sitting in London. And there's no way that an imported model, yet another development model into Africa was going to be the solution. So we set about finding out what are the kind of real conditions under which entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship can thrive in Africa, yeah? What is the ecosystem across 54 African economies, African cultures? It's the diversity. We talk about diversity in the Indian subcontinent or, where I was born, or you talk about the UK and US. They've got nothing on the diversity in Africa, yeah? How were we going to structure this program so we could actually reach and really democratize that opportunity, yeah? And really institutionalize that luck. We've turned to technology. Africa is leapfrogging technology. Young Africans are way ahead. I'm still an analog person, as you can see, right? So we've leveraged technology. Our application is an online application. It is the toughest application form to fill. Why? Because there is also another legacy from the West in Africa, is grantpreneurs as opposed to entrepreneurs. They become amazingly, phenomenally brilliant at filling out your application forms and know exactly what it is that the development agencies are looking for. But often when you talk to a grantpreneur, they forget to tell you what exactly is their product or service, what is their solution, because they've gone from one program to the next, filling out grant applications. So in designing the application form, I really wanted to get rid of grantpreneurs and say, you're an entrepreneur who's come with a particular solution or a problem that you've identified. We have one of our entrepreneurs sitting in the audience, yeah? Recyclers. She's from Nigeria. She applied to the Tony Elumelu Foundation and we supported her. But, she was not a grantpreneur. She was an entrepreneur and her business is phenomenally successful. The application process, how do you go from 20,000 applications that we received from 51 African countries in 2015 to this year, 2018, which is the fourth year of the program. It's a 10-year program, 151,692 applicants from across 54 African countries and 114 Africans living in the diaspora came to the portal. They applied. We put in process a very rigorous, transparent selection process, and we work with Accenture Development Partners to do that. So transparency, and that, there's no way you could do that by running this program remotely, yeah?
Can I pause you to pull out the
Yeah.
things that I'm hearing for Proximate Philanthropy? So I'm hearing...
So for me, Proximate
Yeah.
Philanthropy is you have to be on the ground. You have to know the culture. You have to know the history. You have to know the context. You have to know and be able to look people in the eye, the entrepreneur in the eye as the recycler, and know that there has to be no mediation either. I don't want to talk to the founder of Recyclers through a consultant, who writes a report for me on my behalf on how well her business is doing. Our goal for the foundation in terms of supporting 1,000 entrepreneurs every year, we have 3,000 who've been through the program, is that they should create jobs. There are only two simple things they have to do. One is that their product and service, whether it's a social entrepreneur or for-profit entrepreneur, has to be able to create jobs based on that product or service. Secondly, they must generate revenues for themselves first, for their family, for their community, for their country, etc., etc. Our goal is at the end of the 10 years that we will have created, the entrepreneurs will have created 1 million jobs across Africa. And they will have contributed $10 billion to the economy. And I'd love to share with you
Could I have you just wrap your comments about, because people can ask you specifically more about the fellowship, which actually does sound...
It's not a fellowship, it's an
the program?
Entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Yes. That point about that we're teaching people to fill out grant applications is one that I want to hold for a moment. But let me...
Well, I was going to pick up on that,
Yeah.
actually, if I can offer a contrasting view. So I wish we could have an office on the ground in every country that we fund.
You don't need an
Unfortunately, we don't have the option of being that close, either, quite frankly, to the issue areas that we often fund. We're generalists at the Peery Foundation. We're based in Northern California, and we also still want to be able to deploy philanthropy outside of Northern California. So we've kind of had to take it in a different direction. One of the core principles that I think is enabling us to do that in a way that hopefully embodies a lot of respect and understanding is trying to view our grantees as our customers. So if you work at a foundation and you start to think about who am I accountable to, who are the major stakeholders in our organization, it's our grantees. We're the ones we're serving day in, day out. We're working on their behalf with our board to try and provide them with inputs, which is pretty much only money, sometimes bad advice, but pretty much only money. So it's only one of many, many inputs that they need and to help them build their organization. So how do we do that transaction, that interaction in the best way possible for them? And so I would posit there are three steps to doing that. One, as a foundation, you need to figure out where you're doing harm, first of all. Really assess your process. Where are you taking up too much time? Where are you wasting energy? Where are you bringing together and convening people for listening tours that you do not need to? If you are asking your grantees for more time than the equivalent of more time that means the equivalent salaried time of the organization's staff than you're giving them in grants, you're a net negative. You're not actually helping that organization at all. You're hindering that organization. So I think it really behooves of us to ask very hard questions about the actual value of our grants. Money is time. Money is not renewable in any sense of the word. Grants, as hard as they are to come by, technically are, but money you can't get back anywhere else. Time, you can't get back anywhere else. So how do we figure out how to ask for the information that we need, but not ask them to recreate the wheel, not ask them to recreate anything? How do you talk about your organization? What materials have you created for your own internal use? How do we get the authentic story of who you truly are and what success looks like to you? And then the second step is, once you've figured out where you can stop doing harm, is to actually understand the inherent challenges an entrepreneur or a nonprofit leader faces. Like, what is that entrepreneurial experience really like? Aside from the philanthropic challenges, which are many, what are the other challenges that just come with organization building, working in the communities that you're working in? Help us understand how our grant-making process can ease some of that burden, how we can help address and support you in some of those challenges. And then I think you start to lay a groundwork for what Vu and I, in a book that we've just written, are calling epic partnership. And I don't think you can just jump to epic partnership. Epic partnership is really this idea that we leave aside the roles of funder and fundee funder, grantee, non-profit foundation. We're all here to solve social problems. And right now we sit on different sides of the table. And it's incredibly frustrating that we're trying to address intractable problems while we don't trust each other, we don't communicate with each other, we don't give each other the benefit of the doubt, we don't work together virtually at all. We work against each other most of the time. And so the idea is that once you've owned your own stuff, that is not going so well, and you figure out how to truly empathize with your grantees as your customers, then you can start to have real conversations as true partners as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
I would say, sorry, I'm jet lagged and I'm kind of grumpy because of it. And so I think a few things, like this question, I've been thinking a lot about the misguided questions that we ask in philanthropy, such as, how do we level the playing field? The playing field is never going to be level. Maybe we need to create a new playing field, right? Or how do we bring diverse voices to the table? Well, who determined that you're going to be the one setting the table in the first place? Okay, so there are questions that maybe we should not be asking, because the answer is no matter what we do is going to be wrong. I think this is maybe one of those questions. How do we do proximate philanthropy when so many challenges are out there? I see two things. One is we have a lot of people who have never experienced the injustice we're trying to address, who are now foundation trustees, 95% of whom are white and male. And the CEOs of these foundations are the same, white and male. And then they're determining, so how do we actually get that proximity? It's kind of like asking, like trying to deal with like women's health. And it was like, how do we get these men, who are making all the decisions to be more empathetic to women? I don't know, why don't we just get a bunch of women to determine these decisions in the first place, right? So I think that is something we need to think about. Right? We need the people who are most affected, the communities most affected by injustice, to be making these decisions. Then we don't even have to talk about proximate philanthropy because it's inherent in there. The other thing that I think is a challenge is the fact that we have a whole lot of people, amazing people who are very successful in not social justice, nonprofit fields now coming into here and saying, oh, I know what's good because I ran Microsoft for 28 years and now I know how to solve homelessness. Really? It's like saying, oh, I'm a carpenter and I now know how to beatbox because I was very successful, and all you beatboxers should wear goggles because it worked for me when I was a carpenter. I don't know, like this is what we are dealing with. People who don't, and foundations hire them to provide advice and to give funding to organizations. And I think this is very frustrating for many of us because for many people, this is a hobby. It's like a passion. I just heard someone say, yeah, we started a family foundation. It's our passion to help people. Well, your hobby is, for many people, our professions, and it affects lives. So we have to get out of that mentality that just because you're good at something, you're going to be good at something else entirely different. And then we got to figure out where the distance is.
It's a really amazing resource if anybody's interested in this whole idea of democracy and philanthropy, which are horribly at odds right now, like hideously. Rob Reich from, or Reich, I don't know, Reich, from Stanford, not the Harvard guy. There's two on one on each coast. There's Stanford Rob. But no, the Stanford one. The Stanford one. There are two. You're talking about the other one. There's a Stanford Rob. Yes. Stanford Rob has an article, a speech that he gave all about the threat to democracy that philanthropy plays, which is incredibly powerful. And it basically says that, initially when philanthropy was created, it was challenged as an idea by the leaders of the country that were saying, we are putting so much power in your hands if we grant you this function of a foundation where you can be influencing people to think in the same way as you, systems to be made in the way that you believe they should be influenced. And we don't want to give you that power. And unfortunately, that critique of philanthropy has disappeared. And I really appreciate that you and Rob and other people are bringing this back up, because we haven't figured out how to maintain a democratic voice that guides the direction and the decision-making in philanthropy.
I mean, it sounds like we're leapfrogging the idea of proximity, and we're talking about structural and systems change in the sector. Yeah. And I think that's where we get to if we think about what it really could be. Yes. Parminder, I'm going to have you make one final comment before we get to the audience or our participants' desire for engagement, which I can feel. But
it's really, I really feel very uncomfortable here, because I feel there's a kind of, a private conversation, the Harvard, Stanford examples of writers, talking about philanthropy. Please, we have to know that there is a world out there which is not seen through the prism of California or Silicon Valley or London, yeah? And, what you're talking about has no relevance to what 54 African countries, and I can talk about Africa and I can talk about India, because those are the two places. Not talk about Africa, there's no such thing as one Africa. There are 54 African countries, and I have now traveled, in terms of, proximity. So you could say we only have one office, and that's Lagos, yeah? But we have 3,000 entrepreneurs in those 54 countries. So for the application recruitment for 2018, I was not using advertising and marketing, et cetera. It was the entrepreneurs themselves who had succeeded going through the application, had gone through the 12-week training program, the due diligence, the seed capital, had come to Lagos for a gathering of 1,000 of them, build their relationships. They took it upon themselves to go and set up application workshops, yeah? These Somalian entrepreneurs, another one from Central Africa Republic, mobilized 20,000 applications from Somalia alone, right?
How many people came out of the application process?
No, I'm saying, so this is, for us, as I said, our entrepreneurship program selects 1,000 a year. We could easily select right now. We were a startup, remember, in 2015. We then applied our learning in 2016, consolidated in 2017, and now in 2018, we're big, our model works. It's strong enough to be able to say, we know we can select 1,000, amazingly qualifying.
My question is, I'm just going to push
No, I'm just going to tell you, that to the summit, what amazed me was that ICRC, Red Cross, came to us and said, what you're doing is amazing. We want to also, we know when we leave communities that we worked in post-conflict, they're particularly using Northeast.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the ratio. Because if there are 20,000 people spending, I don't know how many hours applying to your application. I'm just wondering, is there a better way to get to those 1,000 so that 19,000 people don't waste their time?
So it's not about wasting time. It's actually that the process of the application, just because you didn't get selected on the program.
I have heard this so many times. So many
Can I just finish my sentences?
Sorry, please.
Thank you. This isn't, this is a model that is working in the African continent. What it has done is to unleash the fact that entrepreneurship for the major development agency is the way to go forward. As a result of the platform that we have built, we are having conversations right now, next week, with the World Bank, with the IFC. Red Cross has already committed $1 million to supporting additional entrepreneurs. UNDP has already committed another $1 million to supporting additional entrepreneurs. Governments across the 54 countries, which is what we do, we meet with the government and the policymakers, are taking the platform and adapting it for their own particular countries. They are seeing that what the African economies need are job creators and not job seekers. So I'm saying that within the context of Africa and the African continent, this one man, Tony Elumelu, and the model that he has developed is beginning to have an impact across the continent. All I'm saying is that perhaps people outside of the continent might want to look at this model and see how they can begin to be either a part of it or take it and adapt it.
I love what you're doing for
thank you
those
so much.
1,000 entrepreneurs. I suppose my
It's
question
1,250
is 1,250 entrepreneurs. I just wonder if there is a way to reconsider the application process so that the ratio of how many hours go into finding, how many hours across the sector, across those full 20 to 100,000 entrepreneurs who are applying, if that ratio of hours to then entrepreneurs who get selected, the ones who do receive that value, can be shifted.
Sure, I'm happy to have that conversation because I'm sure you've got amazing solutions as to how that can happen. Be brilliant.
Okay, we'll have a chat about that.
As you can see, we have a lively discussion happening. And let's just say that it's actually good, right? I mean, we want to hear open application processes, are they more equitable? Or is proactive, relational grant making where we seek out our partners and we don't have open application processes, but our referral sources are very diverse, is that more equitable? I mean, we don't have a single solution up here clearly, but I think we have good questions and we have good challenges to what may be not good questions, thanks to Vu. But I also want to hear from you, anything you've heard here, you came in with, what questions do you have, or do you have a reflection that you think would be great to share?
Maybe starting with Vu, Julia Davis is my name. I'm curious, what are models of excellent grant making that sort of are mindful of inherent power dynamics? I mean, you talked a lot about the role of power, essentially, and the failures of grant making. What are some examples or one highlight that you would point to say, this is a bright spot, this is a model that really acknowledges and sort of pays attention to the inherent value of communities that are being funded?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of biased towards the Whitman Institute's trust-based grant making, which has 9 principles spelled out. And actually, the Whitman Institute has been working with the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation in New York, who called me once and said, Vu, I really like your blog, and I like what you're doing with Rainier Valley Corps, which is a fellowship to bring more leaders of color into the nonprofit sector. We would like to support your work, but I know that you're very busy, and I want you to spend 20 or 30 hours writing a grant application. So can you just find me the most burdensome grant application that you ever wrote and just forward it to me? Don't even worry about changing the name, right? So a single tear rolled down my face. And right, and then I hung up and in the lobby, right? Yeah, I just found on my phone a grant application with 13 attachments, a logic model, a bespoke budget, everything, and I just forwarded it to Robert Sterling Clark. And then within a couple of weeks, we got $40,000. And that was it. That was like a 5-minute application. And $40,000 is a significant amount of money for my organization, which is small. But I think like the trust that engendered. Now I want to make this foundation proud. I want to be a good partner. I want to be transparent, And I think this is what we need to do. Whitman is another example. When Whitman also supported my organization. But I remember calling P up one day, actually emailing the Whitman Institute and saying, hey, can we talk? Can we make an appointment to talk? I want to see if it seems like we align on a bunch of things, and I want to see if my organization might be a good fit. And so we had that conversation. I was very nervous as a grantee. I spent several hours reading up on the Whitman Institute, Googling everything, stalking Pia on LinkedIn and things, just so I can prepare. When we had that conversation, I discovered they had done the same thing. They had read through my organization's 36-page formative evaluation summary, right? They had all these amazing questions about our work already. And because of that, we didn't even have to submit an application because they had done all of the homework. And the only thing they asked was, well, we didn't see your budget on your website. Would you mind sending that? And so the only thing I sent them was the budget. And we got funded from that. And that was another experience that made me want to remain in the sector. and do better and be a better leader for my community because of the trust that I get from funders like Whitman and Robertson and Clark.
So we've just tried, just this week, I was at a conference with a bunch of other foundations at the weekend, and one of them recommended a new organization, and I literally sent a Slack message with the website to my team back in California and attached the due diligence that this foundation gave to me, sent it over and said, I'm making a grant recommendation of $50,000, make the decision this week. And that's my grant recommendation. Like the organization doesn't even know that we're considering them, because they don't necessarily need to. Like, as somebody else has done the due diligence, like you're saying, why do we need to do it
or
again?
why can't we crowdsource due diligence?
Yeah.
I don't understand why it has to be each individual foundation.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm not a speaker. Over here.
Thank you. I think it's interesting really to see so many philanthropists being set up and wanting to do a lot of good and support a lot of developing countries. I'm just a bit concerned that probably we are moving in the direction that solution providers for technology that is used in development work, the experience that they had where all sorts of solution providers were developing all sorts of applications and putting them out there, and they were not, working as a team, and complicating the issue within the development sector, because there are so many applications being dumped into countries, and they're not interoperable with government systems. I'm just wondering, and with due respect, I make this observation, that all these philanthropists are being set up, whether in fact they could move into the consortium space that we as NGOs are being asked to move into, so that rather than working as individual NGOs and small NGOs and 10, 15 NGOs in one small space, why don't we work together? So I'm just wondering, so many family foundations coming up with so many different agendas and so many applications, processes that we have to prepare and submit to different funders. Why don't you guys think about coming together in groups of foundations so that you make the process easier for us? And finally also, what consideration is made into ensuring that NGOs that are applying for this funding are actually aligned with government agenda? Because in a lot of cases, the NGOs apply in order to fit into the requirements of the philanthropists. And where does government agenda comes into that? So we talk about proximity. I would like to see more philanthropists being proximal to each other. And I would like to see more NGOs being proximal to government agenda as well and government leadership. Thank you.
Beautiful. Here and then back there.
So I think that's a really interesting suggestion. I also want to give a word of caution on philanthropies that have been proximate. So I'm in the world of higher education, and higher education is perhaps one of the great failures of, if you're talking about failures of higher education, of philanthropy. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars being flushed right down the toilet, and then people waiting at the end of the sewer pipe to light the rest on fire. And one of the major reasons for that is that there are a number of big education-oriented philanthropies, and they all do the same thing. And so you get a grant from one, you wind up getting a grant from another, and there's an echo chamber, and there's generally terrible results. But because these are large organizations and they have program officers, and they don't want to really admit failures and grow from them, so they just double down and triple down and quadruple down. And so what you have is a real homogeneity of bad ideas that get a homogeneity of enormous amounts of money, and higher education just continues to get worse. So just caution there.
Thank you.
Can I just add
Sure.
this one?
And then there's someone back there.
To that,
in the white.
and I think this is where the question of accountability comes in, right? Because I don't think that's happening in higher education right now. Those funders are not accountable to anybody. And so one of the big questions that I don't have the answer to, but I really feel like we need to grapple with, is how can people who currently play the role of funders become accountable to or jointly accountable with the organizations that they fund. Because we can't just hand over the money and say, okay, you guys are the experts, and then we'll claim any good impact that comes out of it. Like, we have to claim the bad as well. And we are part of that when we make those decisions, like you're saying. So I think one of the big questions for anybody in the funding world is, how do I figure out a mechanism to be accountable to either those that I fund, or be accountable in partnership with those that I fund. So if you have any ideas on that, I'd love to hear them.
Back there in white.
Thank you. Hello. It's probably a question for everybody in the room, but particularly for the philanthropists. Why are you not adding people from the ground on your board, on your leadership, to understand the issues? It is really, I am from Ethiopia originally, and I do work in Ethiopia, and I am not an expert in the work I do, but I grew up seeing the problems that I'm trying to solve. So I think part of the issue in philanthropy is the people who are making the decisions are not the people who actually understand the problems. And there's a huge problem of trust in bringing the people from the ground, because, you know, if you're a Stanford graduate or whatever, you're thinking that unless somebody has gone to an Ivy League school or has plenty of money, they don't have a say or they don't understand the solution. So I think it really starts from bringing people into your leadership that actually understand the issues, and not only bringing them to leadership, but actually listening to them, because they're going to have a very different point of view. It's going to make you uncomfortable. But are you going to be able to listen to that and sit in that discomfort and know that they actually understand the issue maybe much better than you do? Then everybody can benefit from that.
Down here in white, Preeti. And then this side. Okay, on this side. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name is Preeti. I'm also wondering, I mean, one of the things that was running through my head when you were talking about epic failures was wondering the epic failures that people of color have had while speaking to funders, not from their side, but from the funders' side. For example, somebody yesterday telling me about how, what makes sense in India, a place I have lived for 36 years, and the person not being from there at all. So I was curious about that, but it also got me thinking about what is the responsibility of funders to look at change from a collective impact point of view and not look at just one solution to a problem. I say this specifically because I find a little bit, I mean, in my experience, a little bit of a myopic focus on solutions to large problems, which actually require a more holistic and rounded ecosystem approach to it. So I'm curious to hear if you've thought about it and what you feel about that.
Two questions are related. I think the answer was in the previous comment, is we have to figure out, you know, whether it is, you know, figuring out how to get individuals of color and of varied experience and backgrounds on boards or in decision-making circles, or whether it's figuring out a more democratic structure to philanthropy. But I think the main reason the problem you're describing is because of the homogeneity of the decision-makers.
You know, I mean, I just find this fascinating, this conversation. This is the development world. I could be having this conversation in the film and television industry, which is where I spent 30 years, talking about, you know, how do we get people of color, how do we get ethnic minorities behind the camera, in front of the camera, you know, we must employ more black people, blah, blah, blah. You know, this conversation has to stop, guys. You know, I've been in this country for 30 years plus, yeah? You know, how do you get more black people onto your boards? Or women on the boards is not rocket science. Seriously, yeah? And I find it extraordinary that you are the enlightened lot and you are the more, you know, I've only been in your world for 4 years. I've made films about your world, and they've been quite critical films, yeah? The impact that your philanthropic funding policies have had across the world. But I find you just cannot have this conversation. This has to cease. I have a 30-year-old and a 25-year-old, and she's not going to wait until you guys wake up on your boards. I do Google, all these, national, international foundations, and I look. The first thing I Google is, the first button I press is the board composition. Inevitably, it's an all-white male board composition, right? You go to Tony Elumelu Hairs Holding UBA and you Google, and it has gender reflected, yeah? I mean, majority of the women, the CEOs of majority of the household companies are women, right? We had 24% women business owners applied. The challenge to me was, how do I shift this to a 50-50? And within 3 years, I've done that. It's 41% women business owners who not only applied, have been selected because the role models have played it forward, yeah? How do we increase the number? The answers are there, but I find this conversation is boring. In fact, you shouldn't even talk about board composition. And then the next thing I will press is, well, who is the workforce? Who's the staff? And inevitably, I'll go down the list and find the black person at the bottom of the list, in the most weakest, non-role, right? I mean, you really have to examine yourself. And that is another reason that I would never, ever have thought about working for a philanthropic organization which is from the West, yeah? Because I would have had to bring the same arguments and struggles that I've had 30 years in the film and television industry, trying to change the face of British television, trying to change the face of British film industry, right? Now into yet another sector where the same, practice is apparent.
I think what you're describing is it's not a discussion, it's action. But there's a question in the corner. Yeah, let's take some from this side.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Tim from WaterAid, and over the last most of my career, I've been somebody in jobs where I've spent people's money rather than giving it. And I just wanted to say, I think giving money well is just as hard as spending it well. And so, I think it's great you're having this debate. I applaud the way it's being done. I think it's lovely that we're all having a bit of an argument about it, but it is difficult what we're talking about. I was sitting here reflecting on what would be the most positive experience I've had as a recipient of funds. And it's actually from I've only been doing this job for less than a year, but in my last job, a couple of years ago, I had an amazingly positive experience. So I was just picking out a few features of this relationship, which was with a large US-based foundation. We had no meetings, okay, none. They were all conversations, dropping in on each other when we were in the same part of the world, emails, a few telephone calls. Conversations went on for quite a long time. No leading down the garden path, just conversations. Then a clear objective, a clear process, which was competitive, but it was by invitation, so it was a limited competition and a very quick decision. One feature of that, which I think is quite interesting, came up a little bit earlier about coalition, was I don't think it's necessarily always true, but personally, I think it's quite healthy to encourage coalition to self-organise rather than to... I think donors, philanthropists quite like the idea of, oh, you could work with you. Well, actually, sometimes they don't work well, and however hard you try, it doesn't work. Whereas in this case, my organisation couldn't deliver the objective without working with some other organisations, and we worked out with other organisations who we should be, and we bid for the funding. Once the contract was signed, the philanthropic organisation effectively joined the team. There was a great deal of flexibility and this was related to the work we were doing. So it wasn't flexibility on the overall size of the budget, but it was flexibility on how it was spent and what exactly we were doing. And throughout the process, oceans of trust and oceans of transparency. So I just wanted to share quite a positive example.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I know this is probably something we should have later on at the bar.
Is there a bar here?
At the bar, yes. I think this, just we need to be honest. I don't think that giving away money is hard as what we nonprofits go through. All right. If it were, we would not. You would have way more turnover than we do. Right. We get woken up at night by cash flow issues. The work is heartbreaking, and I don't think. And you don't have to worry about fundraising at the same time as you're doing the work, difficult work of communities getting deported and families being broken apart.
And everyone says yes to us.
Yes, and you are way more attractive and more intelligent, and everyone finds you way more hilarious than they find me. And
That's not true. Not with you, at least.
Yeah. At least not when I'm not jet lagged, but I think we have. Giving away money is only hard because many foundations make it difficult because of the lack of trust. And the way that we treat nonprofits is the way society treats poor people, which is that we give them money, but we don't trust them. We'll give you some welfare food stamps, but you can only buy certain foods. Otherwise, you just can go and buy beer and hot Cheetos or whatever you do, right? We will give you just enough money to keep you in poverty, but if you decide that you're going to use that little bit of money to actually get a job, and now, you're earning over the threshold, so you can't earn past that threshold because we'll take your money away from you. It's the same as in the nonprofit sector. We want you to be sustainable, but if you have more than 3 months of cash reserve, well, then you're not. Why are we funding you in the first place? This is what we deal with all the time. So yeah.
Thank you. I see Sujatha and then one in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sujatha, and I'm with conveners.org. Thank you so much for this conversation and for your honesty. It's actually very humbling and a really nice reminder that we should disagree with each other in public more often. I mean that sincerely. So thank you for that. And I wanted to share, I don't want to digress the conversation from what we're focused on, but what I'm thinking of right now is I was like, okay, this is a wonderful topic, exploring power and privilege in ... And for me, I was thinking about looking around the room, and I put myself in this, like I'll look in the mirror and feel guilty myself about this too, is I'm curious about how do we explore power and privilege in terms of the nonprofit leadership side as well. And I'm wondering if there's a role as philanthropists in that space. And what I mean by that is I tend to see the same or similar organizations in really powerful dialogues such as this one over and over. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we're able to expand that as well. And do you as philanthropists feel like you have a role to do that? Or is that something that other people should solve?
So I'm going to do a blatant book plug here. So the book that Vu and I just wrote, we refer to everybody in the sector as unicorns, which is a Vu term because, he's fun and funny. But there's one page where we talk about the family tree of the unicorns. And on here, there are funders, fundraisers, activists, community organizers, and investors and all sorts. And there's an exercise in the back of the book that is basically go to the next conference and look around. Who is underrepresented? Who is overrepresented? Write it down, take note, and then whoever you are, it doesn't matter if you're a funder, it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit, you have a voice in influencing the makeup of those conferences and those events. Write an email, lobbying, who was not there. It's really important that this person or this perspective is represented, and I felt like it was missed in this event. Like I just encourage you to, be the answer to that question, and everybody else as well. Who's not here at the Skoll World Forum and should be on this panel, should be in the audience. And one group that I feel like has done that really well is New Profit. They're gathering. Within 1 year, they turned it around so that the DEI metrics were off the scale, perfect, amazing. The next year they got feedback that there wasn't enough representation from rural communities and last mile communities. Within 1 year they turned it around. So it's possible, it can be done, they just need to hear it.
I just want to answer that two ways. One is when you are going to these conferences, let it not always be the COO or the COO. Yeah. Let it be the receptionist in your organization, right? Let it be people in the lower, so-called hierarchy of your organization. As I sit here, Tope, Wamaka, Balanle, all my staff are under 30, by the way, and they're all from Nigeria and other parts of Africa. We only have 10 staff managing this program. But they're right now in Uganda, Kenya, Benin, Republic of Benin, and others, yeah? Where they're meeting with the entrepreneurs that have gone through the program, yeah? So, and Moya, and she's the alumni. So basically they are being exposed and they will be now going to meet the policymakers and the presidents, where we will take the entrepreneurs who've gone through our program, who've identified challenges in their own countries, and they are now going to be able to take them directly to the policymakers to say, this is what you need to do in order to create an enabling environment for entrepreneurship to grow and develop in these respective countries, yeah? I think that's fundamental, because it's the same faces that you see at these conferences. It's almost like a gravy train for for the senior, and the people who are really doing the back office work do not get to participate. Their voices do not get heard at these conferences.
I'm going to pause you now, because I just want to I'm going to get 2 more questions, and then we're going to make closing comments. So I see one back there. He has his hand up. And then her. So maybe the 2 of you can pose your questions, and then we'll use them to make closing comments.
Thank you. My name's Nick Stanhope. I run a research and design organization, and we did a big piece of research last year, supported by big UK funders who were very kind of equally open and honest about some of the questions you're asking. And we spoke to about 100 organizations, half non-profits, half funders. And one thing that really, really jumped out, which overlaps with some of the things you were talking about, is that funders wanted to give more money to kind of core development and unrestricted funding, but they were worried about the tree stump thing you talked about. And they said they were looking for things like really good business plans and value propositions, a really good ongoing internal measurement of impact and progress, really good kind of culture of learning and improvement. And they didn't find those things, and so they didn't give much of that money. And then speaking to the social organizations, it's very clear why those things don't exist, because they're not good at business planning. They're good at making up stuff at 4 a.m. before a grant deadline. They aren't good at internal impact measurement because they're good at making up reports at the end of grant processes. And they aren't good at ongoing learning and improvement because they're really good at making up case studies and stories about their work. So the kind of infantilization of the sector is really drastic. We work with a lot of organizations who just have no capacity or skills in any of these critical areas, and we get a lot of impact investment, and those impact investors, they wouldn't dream of investing in these organizations unless those things were present. So it's really just a highlight from getting that picture that it's not like a 1-year thing. That we've got decades of investment to do in our sector. Which builds up these core skills and capacities and then allows money to flow into them. It's completely changed mindsets, exactly, because there's a smoke and mirrors culture in a lot of these organizations. And actually, the one final thing is we spoke to about 50 trusts and foundations. There is a real honesty in those organizations about what they're doing wrong, and that's reflected today. But in lots of social organizations, they were just in "we've got it nailed" mode. They couldn't say anything else because that's the only thing they thought that grants would kind of flow as a result of. So there is a massive mindset change. There's a massive boost of capacity and skills needed. There's a kind of, I completely agree with this question of trusts and foundations working, together to all invest in and support these kinds of things, and to just completely forget this one by one grant proposal thing, different applications form, completely forget all having different impact metrics and different reporting, and completely forget a kind of story based. Let's just get rid of all that crap, and it's going to take time, but this kind of appetite is there to do it. So
there was he had his hand up, in the very back. Yeah.
So I've heard several calls to action, many that are focused on funder behavior change, and specifically funder leadership and funder trustees. And my question to the entire panel is, as a relatively junior staff member of the Skoll Foundation, what might I be able to do to influence that leadership and those set of trustees when there are sometimes structural disincentives or firewalls between where I sit and those that actually contain the power within the organization?
this book, and I want you to like go through and find some exercises in here that you can lead with your team, even if it's just over a lunch hour. Just start the conversation so you're not the only one who's thinking about this stuff. So you're not the only one who's aware of, you know, something that might not be quite perfect at the Skoll Foundation. So you build allies. But the way to do it is for you to start the conversation, do it in a way that is inclusive, engaging, active, and self-reflective and safe as well. And then build your allies and start spread your influence across the organization. And I am sure you will be able to start to shift the organization. It only takes one person to start. Good for you.
Leadership positions. Anyone else want to say anything about this question? We're going to start.
Get angry. I mean, all this is really good. You know, when I wanted to bring about a change in the BBC or ITV, I got angry, and it helped. You know, starting at the top, actually. Don't get angry with people that at the water cooler. Get angry with people who are in positions of power to do something. Don't waste your energies talking to another person who's equally in an equally helpless, lower position. Talk to someone, you know, above, yeah? And maintain, the anger isn't anger is passion, because you want to see a change in that organization. Why? Because the organization's existence depends on that change. Otherwise it will die, yeah? And Skoll Foundation, whether it's the Skoll Foundation or the BBC, if it doesn't change as an institution, inertia sets in and it begins. Well, it's people who look like you know, look like them, and they have the same conversations. Go in there and disrupt that conversation.
I would also say get over imposter syndrome, because POCs, imposter syndrome. Yeah. So POCs and women, and I mean, we always doubt ourselves. Like, should we apply for this position in leadership? Should we? I don't know. Maybe we're not qualified. Get over it.
Very simple answers. Not easy, but thank you for asking that question, because, you know, Sujasa's question also reminded me that often who's on these panels are actually trustees and CEOs and presidents, whether it's on the nonprofit side or on the foundation side, and that the perspectives of the views of program staff, admin team, operations team are just as critical and important. We, shockingly, are at the end of our time. And it feels like we're just sort of breaking into, it's interesting that we really migrated away in some ways from the theme of proximate philanthropy, and we are really breaking open the idea of structural and systems and rebalancing, or you don't like that word, structural and systems transformation of multiple sectors. I'm gonna ask each of our panelists to literally make a paragraph of closing comment here, and then we'll wrap. I'm going to start with you, Vu.
I think we got to do things differently. My organization is doing this thing called the Community Alliance Model, where we get a bunch of organizations together, all led by communities of color. We handle all their finances, HR, all the back office stuff, so they can focus on doing their work. We also send fellows full-time to these organizations. So the way that we relate to one another has to change. But I also think that many of the foundation philosophies and practices are archaic and destructive, like the focus on overhead, the one-year grants. You know, I mean, we're trying to put out fires, and some foundations are still going, hey, I want to make sure the money I'm giving you to put out the fire is going to the water and not the hose. What is your water to hose ratio? Get over it. Or the houses will keep burning.
Thanks, Vu. Parminder? A paragraph?
So I'm only obviously going to talk about the extraordinary philanthropic organization that I work for, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and I invite you all to come and experience 1,500 plus entrepreneurs gathered in one location in October the 26th, 27th in Lagos. Really, seriously, come. You will be totally and utterly changed by it. Huh?
Are you going to still invite us?
Yes, you are invited, yeah. No, because it'd be really good to put you in front of the 1,500 and let them challenge you. Secondly, I just want to share, so I've started in the first 3 years, I refused to do this, reporting. Thankfully, I don't have to report to anybody. It's just the one investor at the moment, yeah? But I have, and it takes 3 years for an entrepreneur to get their project off the ground, their business off the ground. So I refused to monitor and evaluate in the first year, second year, but in the fourth year I am, and we're in the process of producing the impact report. Remember our two goals, jobs and revenue. And I've just got a sample of the 400 so far, and we're continuing the process of gathering the data. When we started, this is 2015 to 2017, there was 3 million. They have now generated 10 million in revenues. There was 1,397 jobs when they first started. It's now 3,728. To date, we've spent $20 million in building the infrastructure and in $15 million in direct seed capital to the entrepreneurs. And I'm taking, in terms of ongoing funding for the entrepreneur, no mediators, no consultants, no nothing. We're using $5 million from the foundation's $100 million to anchor an SME fund, which is now multiplying to $25 million at the moment, that entrepreneurs across Africa, SMEs, including those who've gone through the Tony Elumelu Foundation program, have gone through. And then finally, our drive is to build and create not a level playing field, but an entrepreneurial ecosystem across the 54 African countries. And we continue, as my chairman right now, with the 3 people from the foundation are in Uganda, Kenya, etc. And we will take this conversation out to to really put pressure or influence the governments to build an enabling environment for entrepreneurs across the African continent. And we invite you to support that.
Thank you. Last words, Jessamyn.
There are nightmares everywhere, right? I mean, I have my nightmares, you have your nightmares. Like, we've all got challenges and we're all trying to figure out how to do things better. I just invite you all to dream bigger and to reflect as funders on what it is that might be improvable in our processes, in our approach, in integrating more humility into our work and really understanding the people that we serve, the organizations. And if you're a nonprofit, you're a social good organization, investigate your power. You have more power than you think you do. You have more influence over your funders than you think you do. And it's only when funders investigate their humility and nonprofits investigate their power that we have a chance of building a different landscape, like being on a different playing field. Thank you. And just as a gift from one of my co-authors, we've got some books for everybody here who's attending the session. I invite you to take one for yourself and one for somebody else that you can give it to who also wants to build epic partnerships in this sector. So thank you.
Yes. So.